Good morning, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Hilton Nusa Dua Bali Resort. So, in this beautiful morning, we kindly invite you to join us here in the ballroom, and please be seated. And please don't forget to always implement a very strict and disciplines of the health protocol. Ladies and gentlemen, for more information regarding the T20 Summit, include the materials during the panel session and also the remarks, you can just go to the website of www.summit.t20indonesia.org. Thank you, and let us wait to start the summit immediately. Thank you.
Recording in progress.
Om Swastiastu. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam sejahtera untuk kita bersama. Namo Buddhaya. Salam kebajikan. Good morning and also welcome to distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, to our beautiful occasion this morning. So firstly, as I see that many familiar faces here and also we are both of us here are very happy to see you smiles this morning. And it is indeed, of course, we feel very gratitude as here with us is Professor Bambang Brojonegoro. Good morning, Bapak. And then also we have Professor Jisman Simanjuntak. Good morning. And the lead co-chairs of the T20 Indonesia, T20 Advisory Board members, T20 Task Force lead and co-chairs, G20 representatives, G20 engagement groups, T20 Indonesia partners and sponsors, and of course, honorable speakers and participants of the T20 Indonesia Summit 2022. So it is indeed an honor for both of us here to standing in front of all of you as your master of ceremony. So please, just like the Indonesian proverb, tak kenal maka tak sayang. Or in English, we can say it as like, if you don't know someone yet, then you cannot share the same vision or love and also compassion with them. So please allow us to introduce ourselves. My name is Dian Ariswari.
Yes, and my name is Arif Senoaji. Once again, we both really honored. And of course, we'd like to extend once again our appreciation for your presence this morning. Once again, welcome to the
T20 Indonesia Summit 2022.
Yes. Ladies and gentlemen, this event is hosted by the Institute of Economic and Social Research Faculty of Economic and Business Universitas Indonesia and the Center for Strategic and International Studies, or CSIS. Held as the capstone event for T20 Indonesia, the T20 Summit 2022 gathers world-leading thinkers, policymakers, and experts to discuss the latest research-based policy recommendation and matters of global importance.
Yes, and of course our event today will not be possible without the support of our valuable sponsors. So we would like to also acknowledge all of our valuable sponsors during this time. So thank you so much to our main knowledge partners, Ford Foundation, AREA, Rockefeller Foundation, ADB Institute and Knowledge Sector Initiatives, and then also from the sponsors, we would like to thank Telkom Indonesia, Samudra Indonesia, Rise Invest, Combivar, and April Group for the support. In addition to this, we also receive a lot of support from other partners and also sponsors, and of course, we would like to thank all of those sites and also partners that supporting this T20 Indonesia Summit 2022. So ladies and gentlemen, please kindly give a round of applause as appreciation to all of our partners and also sponsors.
Thank you so much. And now, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, to begin the summit, we would like to ask everyone to please stand up, stand on your feet for the national anthem of the Republic of Indonesia. Once again, please rise. Indonesia Raya. Thank you. You may all be seated. Ladies and gentlemen, to mark the beginning of our agenda today, we will be hearing a speech that will be delivered by lead co-chairs of T20 Indonesia.
Yes, he is an economist that began his career as an academic at the Faculty of Economics and Business, the University of Indonesia. For more than 2 decades, he devoted his knowledge and experiences to the country in various roles as the Ministers of Finance and then also the Minister of National Development Planning, the head of the National Development Planning Agency, and then also he was the Minister of Research and Technology, head of Research and Innovation Agency National. He initiated Indonesia's first tax amnesty scheme, and then also he designed and improved budget spending by allocating the very first direct transfer to all 74,000 villages in Indonesia. He is currently even busier, I believe that, because after finishing his duties as ministers, he is appointed by many national companies to become independent commissioners, and then also he's still following his passions as a researcher and also academic. So, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, please give a round of applause for Professor Bambang Brojonegoro.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Very good morning, everybody. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, and especially I like to greet Honorable Advisory Board, Dr. Bambang Susantono, Professor Jeffrey Sachs, who might be following online, Dr. Paulo Magri, Dr. Anna Katarina Hornich, Dr. Zhang Yunling, and also our partners, Mr. Hidetoshi Nishimura from area, Bapak Alexander Irwan from Ford Foundation, Dipali Kana from Rockefeller Foundation, Vice President Ashok Lavasa from ADB, Dean Tetsushi Sonobe, ADB Institute, Dr. Dennis Nower, Global Solution Initiative, and also I would like to give appreciation to the host institution of the T20, LPM, or Institute for Economic and Social Research, Faculty of Economics and Business, University of Indonesia, Center for Strategic and International Studies, CSIS, SCCIC from ITB, Bandung, CIPS, Semeru Research Institute, CHEMS from University of Indonesia, and also P2EB from Universitas Gadjah Mada, Yogyakarta. And also I like to greet some of the high-ranking government officials who is attending this T20, including Pak Yayan Maulana from Ministry of Foreign Affairs. First of all, of course, I would like to welcome you to T20, and especially I'd like to welcome you to Bali, Indonesia. As you all know, the T20 or Think 20 is the official engagement group of G20, bringing together leading think tanks and research centers worldwide. It serves as ideas bank of the G20 and aims to provide research-based policy recommendation to the G20 leaders. At current affairs, where we witness uneven economic recovery, the rise in inequality, and the global friction that call for global coordinated actions, the 2022 T20 has become ever more important. T20 position is central in ensuring the issues that G20 leaders intend to resolve are the pertinent ones. In addition, the policy recommended by T20 could equip G20 leaders with deep understanding of the important issues through academically rigorous analysis, along with recommendations that should be taken. Through its main output, the T20 communique, Indonesia's presidency pushes several recommendations to the G20 leaders to address the current turmoil. T20 Indonesia urged G20 leaders to take immediate concerted effort to achieve inclusive and stronger recovery, restructuring global health architecture, leveraging digital transformation, accelerating sustainable energy transition, and building a better and more solid cooperation. Considering the importance of role held by T20, Indonesia aims to continue the exemplary work of the current and previous T20 presidency in the upcoming year. Coincide with the 10-year anniversary of T20 establishment, Indonesia intends to put its best in ensuring the objectivity and inclusivity of policy recommendation. Considering the recent development, upholding the inclusivity aspect of the discussion on the G20 level might not be an easy task. Currently, the narrative revolving around the global issues still dominated by Northern voice that tends to be more congruent with the policies and views of developed countries. However, developing and low-income countries are as much affected by the current crisis as developed countries, if not more. Thus, increasing the representative of Southern voice is crucial to ensure the global narrative being shaped are considered just and fair and could be accepted by all governments from all types of the countries. Global issues such as COVID-19 pandemic, climate change, and digital transformation happens in a scale that requires collective actions, and ensuring the commitment from all government and stakeholders is almost non-negotiable. In the T20 communique, T20 Indonesia pushes for 5 main policy recommendations. First, fostering recovery and resilience. Second, accelerating the progress towards net zero emission. Third, governing transformation to the digital society. Fourth, making the economy more inclusive and people-centered. And fifth, reviving global governance. The recommendations have been developed through a rigorous process. T20 Indonesia has gathered 764 policy briefs abstract and produced 130 policy briefs written by more than 200 authors from think tank network across the globe. To ensure a rigorous output, T20 Indonesia has also organized 3 main side events, namely Global Solution Summit, Global Policy Forum, and Global Dialogue. In addition, T20 Indonesia task forces also held more than 200 side events from the 9 task forces. In the spirit of cooperation, G20 can catalyze a shared recovery from the multitude of shocks that afflict the world following the periodic financial crisis, geopolitical power shifts, the multifarious impact of climate change, COVID-19 pandemic, and the ripple effects of Russia-Ukraine war and related economic sanctions. This is by no means the first time that the world is faced with difficult policy environment. World leaders have proved time and again determination and finesse to turn multitude of shocks into opportunity for innovative institutional rearrangement that serve as source of renewal in all walks of life, including business. With similar cooperative spirit and huge scientific knowledge and technological resources at their disposal, G20 leaders can create and accumulate momentum for inclusive recovery in the rest of 2022 and 2023, as well as gathering momentum for the progression of the multifaceted transition to a better world that leaders in politics, business, academia, and civil societies have committed to almost unanimously. To thrive further, therein deepening cooperation is indispensable. Whatever success leaders at G20 Indonesia are able to accomplish, they will gather greater momentum as presidency of G20 moves successively to India, Brazil, and South Africa as the series of presidency held by developing countries. Please enjoy T20 Summit as the marks of our process in bringing the best effort from think tank across the globe. Hope you have a fruitful, insightful, and pleasant forum ahead. Thank you very much. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you so much, Professor Bambang Brojonegoro, for the remarks.
Yes, and Professor Bambang Brojonegoro has just underlined and emphasized how strategic and also how essential the positions of the T20 itself in creating key policy recommendations for the G20 leaders, especially in facing current issues and also with the challenges which are even more difficult with the current global political tensions. And then now?
Yes, and then now let's move on. Ladies and gentlemen, our next agenda, we will now be hearing the opening speech that will be delivered by the Coordinating Minister of Economic Affairs, His Excellency Minister Erlangga Hartarto.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm honored to be here with you all the T20 Indonesia Summit 2022. Before I start this remark, I would like to greet Professor Bambang Brojonegoro and Professor Jisman Simanjuntak, the lead and co-chairs of T20, T20 Advisory Board members, T20 Task Force, lead and co-chairs, speakers, and participants. The consensus aimed to be achieved by the global leader from G20 forum face a serious potential issue in which there is no guarantee the final consensus produced is the most objective and impartial ones. This problem arises due to the inherent nature of global leaders that is inseparable from any conflicting interests. Geopolitical tension, political pressure, and asymmetrical representative among countries group are various factors that could drive to the conversation among nations, leader into an undesirable outcome. Facing this challenge, T20 could step up to and step in to support the discussion on the G20 level towards the direction of a more desirable outcomes. Embedded with the independency nature from any national government and their respective political agenda, T20 has the opportunity to supply invaluable perspective on what agenda to the global leaders should be putting their focus on. As an engagement group constituted by researchers with direct channel to provide recommendation to G20 leaders, T20 position is central in ensuring the issues of G20 leaders intend to resolve or the pertinent ones. Considering the recent development and upholding the inclusivity aspect of the discussion on the G20 level might not be an easy task. Currently, the narrative involving around the global issues is still dominated by northern voice that tends to be more congruent with the policies and view of developed countries. However, developing and low-income countries are as much affected by the current crisis as developed countries, if not more. This increasing the representative of southern voices is crucial to ensure the global narrative being shaped are considered just and fair and could be accepted by all governments from all types of countries. Global issues such as COVID-19 pandemic, climate change, digital transformation happens in a scale that require collective action, and ensuring commitment from all government and stakeholders is almost non-negotiable. As an engagement group of G20 comprised by researchers and academia, T20 is in the strategic position to serve at least two main roles in the contribution of solving current global issues. First, due to independency from any national government and their respective political agenda, T20 could provide valuable insight on what agenda of the global leaders should be focused on. As an engagement group constituted by researchers with direct channel to provide recommendation to G20 leaders, T20 position is central in ensuring the issues that G20 leaders intend to resolve are the pertinent one. In addition, the policy recommended by T20 engagement group could equip G20 leaders with deep understanding of the important issues through academically rigorous analysis, along with the recommendation that should be taken. Second, T20 could serve as an anchor to ensure the inclusivity and unbiased prioritization of issues discussed, serve as an idea bank of G20, and aims to provide research-based policy recommendation to G20 leaders. Numerous task forces are created under T20 to represent each global challenge to be addressed during ongoing presidency. Thus, T20 has the capability and capacity to formulate the task force such that it represents beyond the critical issues experienced by the host country. The inclusivity aspect has become more imperative than ever as the COVID-19 pandemic creates widening inequality across country. Through challenging, it is within the power of T20 to ensure its research agenda and formulation is equally representing both developed and developing countries. To end this remark, I would like to congratulate the T20 as it is reaching its final stage of presidency. Congratulations to LPM FEB UI and CSIS Indonesia for its excellent hosting of T20 Indonesia, along with all the host institutions, the task force within T20 Indonesia. I would like to extend my gratitude to Ford Foundation, Rockefeller Foundation, AREA, and ADB for their magnificent support and contribution to the T20 Indonesia. For all the participants of T20 Indonesia Summit, hope you have fruitful and enjoyable forum and discussion ahead.
Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, as we know that the T20 Indonesia has been working since September last year by conducting series of activities, and also the goals of the activities is supposed to produce a high quality and also concrete recommendations for the G20 leaders. The ultimate deliverable of the T20 is of course the T20 communique that encapsulates the essence of policy recommendations from the T20 to the G20 leaders.
Yes, and it comprises the T20 vision that calls for more robust cooperation to rescue global governance by concerted actions that are imperative to achieving inclusive and stronger recovery. The T20 communique's policy recommendations are gathered from the T20 policy briefs and side events, in addition to an inclusive and closed process consultation with think tanks, policymakers, and other relevant stakeholders around the world.
Yes, so now, ladies and gentlemen, we will witness the official launch. This is the launching ceremony of the T20 communique. And now we would like to kindly invite to be here on the stage for the official launch, lead co-chairs of the T20 Indonesia, Professor Bambang Brojonegoro, along with Professor Jisman Simanjuntak.
And also would like to invite the executive co-chairs of T20 Indonesia, Dr. Yose Rizal Damuri, along with Dr. Riyatu Mariatul Kiptia.
And also the advisory board members of T20 Indonesia, Paulo Magri and also Ana Katarina Hornitz, please. Ladies and gentlemen, to mark the official launch of the T20 communique, the ladies and gentlemen here on the stage will hold the book or the T20 communique, and the T20 communique will present key policy recommendations for the G20 leaders, which are based on timely research and also evidence-based, and therefore it is hoped that it will contribute to force developing solutions to urgent global issues.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, T20 has produced 519 policy briefs that support and also as inputs for the G20 process.
And of course, to address current turmoil, all of the key recommendations available in the T20 communique will be very beneficial and also helpful to the G20 leaders in creating the policy. Please have for the session for a while, and once again, let's give a round of applause. Congratulations for the official launch of the T20 communique.
Yes, and then this recommendation book will be conveyed to President Joko Widodo.
Thank you so much, and now you may now return back to your chair. Well, as mentioned earlier, that the whole material of this T20 Indonesia Summit, include the T20 communique, will be available on our website. So you can just go to our website later on. Well, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, now we will start the first plenary sessions of the T20 Indonesia Summit 2022, which will taking the theme of bridging diverse interests for greater global cooperation.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, in this session we will have the keynote speech from Her Excellency Retno Marsudi, Minister of Foreign Affairs, Republic of Indonesia, and of course 5 panelists, and they are Mr. Khatib Basri, former Minister of Finance, Republic of Indonesia, and lead co-chairs of TF7, Mr. Fukunari Kimura, Chief Economist of Economic Research Institute for ASEAN and East Asia area.
And then also we have Dennis Hudi, Director at the Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation Policy Support, Peter Drysdale, Emeritus Professor of Economics at the Australian National University, and Alicia Garcia Herrero, the Chief Economist for Asia Pacific at Natixis and Adjunct Professor at Hakus Business School. And of course, the first session will be led by our chair later on. However, we will tell you a bit about the first session, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. So this session will be, of course, a very beneficial session for us, as the theme is bridging diverse interests for greater global corporations. So earlier, Professor Bambang already mentioned that it's very important to have a global cooperation, especially during current global issues and also current global challenge. The challenge ahead for the G20 leaders is multidimensional, and the global problems, of course, demand a cooperative responses and also a strong collaborations. So this session will serve as an interactive platform for us to advance and also share ideas on building a more prosperous, sustainable, inclusive world, and also a better cooperations among each other, especially the G20 member countries. So the session itself will be led by our chair, right?
Yes, this session will be led by Deputy Executive Director for Research, Center for Strategic and International Studies, CSIS. Ladies and gentlemen.
She joined CSIS since December 2000.
Yes.
So quite long as well, and currently she is the Deputy Executive Director for Research since January 2022. Previously, she was the head of Department of International Relations and also deputy head of Department of Politics and International Relations. Her research interests include issues of regional security in the Indonesian Pacific, ASEAN, maritime security, Indonesia's foreign policy, and also development cooperation. So with the long experiences and also expertise in the cooperations across the region, I think she will lead the session interactively and also fruitful. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome on the stage the chair of the first plenary session. This is Dr. Muhibat.
Very good morning, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. As mentioned, I have the honor of chairing the first session of the T20 Summit. But before we begin, I would like to ask all the panelists of the first session to please join me on stage. Please. Up to you. Anywhere you want to sit. Anywhere you feel comfortable. Yeah, it's fine. Here is fine. Pak Didi, if you speak first, you can sit next to me if you want, in any order. Thank you. Yes, as I mentioned, I have the honor of chairing the first session of the T20 Summit. This session is titled Bridging Diverse Interests for Greater Global Cooperation. This is a very important session, I think, to kick off the discussion throughout our summit for the next 2 days. This session is based on the idea that multilateral policies on trade, finance, political securities, which have been promoted since the end of the Second World War, are now met with new challenges. The current global dynamics are presenting us with new problems, new challenges. And now, furthermore, in 2022, we see that the recovery agenda of the post-COVID-19 pandemic is also influencing the way that multilateral order is being promoted. And G20 is, of course, expected to play a role in bridging these various interests of various countries in overcoming these new problems and new challenges. So the main idea, the main objective of this session is to basically discuss how G20 can bridge these various interests of various countries and how G20 can also contribute to overcoming these new challenges. And for this discussion, we have the honor of a very distinguished list of panelists who are sitting with me on the stage here. We will begin the session by a keynote speech, which will be given by Her Excellency Retno Marsudi, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Indonesia. Minister Retno is unfortunately unable to be with us physically here this morning, but she has sent us a video recording which I will show you in a few minutes. But please allow me to briefly introduce the keynote speaker and also the 5 panelists who are sitting with me on the stage this morning. So first of all, of course, Minister Retno Marsudi is an Indonesian diplomat and currently the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Indonesia. She is the first woman to be appointed to the post, and she has very long experience of being a diplomat. She was previously the Indonesian ambassador to the Netherlands from 2012 to 2014, as well as ambassador to Iceland and Norway from 2005 to 2008. The discussion will then kick off with the first panelist, Bapak Muhammad Khatib Basri, former Minister of Finance of Indonesia, and he is now the chairman of the PT Bank Mandiri and also chairman of the PT Excel Axiata. And he is a member of various international advisory councils, including the high-level advisory group on sustainable and inclusive recovery and growth formed by the World Bank. The second panelist is Professor Peter Drysdale, Emeritus Professor of Economics, Head of the East Asian Bureau of Economic Research, and Editor-in-Chief of the East Asia Forum in the Crawford School of Public Policy in the College of Asia and the Pacific at the Australian National University. The next panelist is Dr. Fukunari Kimura, Chief Economist of the Economic Research Institute of ASEAN and East Asia, or AREA, based in Jakarta since 2008, and Professor in the Faculty of Economics, Keio University in Tokyo, Japan. The next speaker is Dr. Dennis Hu. He's an economics and holds his degree from the University of Warwick, UK, and then also from the University of Manchester, also in the United Kingdom. He was a regional cooperation specialist at the ASEAN Development Bank before taking up his current appointment at APEC. And last but not least, we have Dr. Alicia Garcia Herrero, adjunct professor at the HKUST, as well as senior fellow at Brussels-based economic think tank Bruegel, and a non-resident research fellow at Madrid-based political think tank Real Instituto Elcano. So welcome to all the 5 panelists who are joining us this morning in this ballroom. So to kick off the discussion, please we can all listen to the keynote speech by Her Excellency Retno Marsudi, Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Indonesia.
Professor Bambang Brojonegoro, Mr. Jisman Simanjuntak as lead co-chairs of Think 20 Indonesia, Excellencies, distinguished participants. Since our last meeting in February, global landscape has changed significantly, worsened by the war in Ukraine. As the saying goes, when elephants fight, it is the grass that suffers. Hike in energy prices, food insecurity, and high inflation continue to burden all countries, particularly developing countries. Yet, in these trying times, instead of standing closer together, countries stand further apart. Instead of promoting dialogue and peaceful resolution, containment and use of force are being put forward. These differences also emerged at the G20. As President, Indonesia works hard to keep the G20 cooperation intact. Regardless of our differences, we must continue to sit together to solve global challenges. Otherwise, the credibility of the G20 will be at stake. This is exactly where the T20 could play its important role. Your thoughts and ideas are invaluable in supporting the G20 to accelerate global recovery, and you must continue to do so beyond our presidency. In this regard, allow me to highlight 2 points for the T20 to focus on. First, on how to exit this unprecedented crisis. Many experts have predicted that global economy will be more challenging in the next 5 years than the previous 2 decades. Coupled with persistent challenges from the pandemic to the climate crisis, it is sure to have a profound impact on all of us. Yet, our ability to respond are often hampered by increasing fragmentation between developed and developing, between global north and global south, which in turn leads to incoherent approach and undermines our ability to address urgent global issues. I believe the T20 is well placed to offer fresh ideas on how countries can cooperate beyond its narrow self-interest. During the pandemic, we have seen countries come together to tackle issues that impact all us. More than 1 billion doses of vaccines were mobilized through COVAX. And in our G20 presidency, we have secured more than $1.4 billion to strengthen pandemic preparedness and response capacities to all countries. Second, on how to rebuild the future global architecture. Colleagues, post-war security architecture push countries toward containment and alienation. This risks escalating tension ever further in a world steeped with potential flashpoints. It is evident that such paradigm proved inadequate in addressing the global crisis of today. Now it is time for us to ask ourselves of the future we want. If we want to have a peaceful, stable, and prosperous future, we need conducive environment for strategic trust and collaboration to take place. If we want to have an inclusive world where no one gets left behind, then we need a fair and effective multilateral system which respects UN Charter and international law. And to realize these visions, the T20 should come up with new ideas to further solidify these new paradigms. Ladies and gentlemen, the world has high expectations for our work. Together, we must contribute in reshaping global cooperation to realize the future we want. I wish you a successful summit. I thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So let us now directly go into our discussion this morning, and I'd like to kick off by posing a question to Pak Khatib Basri, if I may. We discussed about how G20 is supposed to play this bridging role. What's your take on this? Is G20 equipped for this, and what role can Indonesia play during this year's chairmanship, in your opinion?
Thank you very much, Sophia, for your question. I wish I know the exact answer for your question, because your question was probably about 20% of the global GDP, if I can answer this. At a time when the world desperately needs a global cooperation due to the pandemic, exactly like what Minister Retno mentioned, the increase of the geopolitical tension, the economic nationalism, the vaccine nationalism, the fear of the supply chain disruption, uneven global economy are making it more difficult. Yeah, especially because we probably, Minister Retno mentioned about the narrow self-interest, and I completely agree, because we are in the position like what economists called in the game theory like a prisoner's dilemma, that everyone would like to focus for their own short-term self-interest. But in fact, the best payoff will be the global cooperation, but this is not going to be easy. So let me try to highlight some of the issues that, and several potential solutions related to that. The first one is, if we are talking about the current situation now, one of the biggest problem, I'm talking from the macro perspective, is how to recalibrate the exit strategy. Because I think all of us are fully aware, due to the war in Ukraine, the impact to the energy prices, the food prices, really hit the vulnerable groups in many developing economies. And as a result, I can imagine a country like, developing countries, including Indonesia, India, Brazil, and many countries all over the world, like it or not, should allocate more social protection to the vulnerable groups. So somehow, we need the expansion of the fiscal policy, because we need the inclusive development to avoid the scarring effect of the pandemic. But at the same time, we know the situation of the inflation threat in the advanced economy will require them to withdraw the stimulus as soon as possible. That's already happening in the US, in Europe, for example. So the first question is, how do we recalibrate and sit together and use the G20 as an avenue to discuss about this? I myself, I had an experience of managing the taper tantrum 2013, and I recall during that time, G20 was very useful forum that we can discuss with this, advanced economy, especially the US, when they started to unwind the quantitative easing. Yeah, so that's one of the, way to sort of like to recalibrate the exit strategy. The second issue that I would like to highlight is in related to the issue of this climate, for example. Yeah, because unlike in the advanced economy, in the developing economies, climate change is often perceived as a luxury goods because we are too busy with our day-to-day problem like poverty, like unemployment, the development issues. So we are all agree that we need to reach that net zero emission in the future. But the question is exactly that Professor Bambang Brojonegoro mentioned, how to have this energy transition, just and affordable energy transition in the proper manner. So we can discuss this issue as well. In my view, maybe one way to do it is exactly like what Indonesian government did a couple of days ago, to use the green stimulus to achieve the development objective. For example, by reducing the fuel subsidy, it is good to reduce the demand for fossil fuel, and this money could be used to protect the vulnerable groups. This kind of model is sort of like a combination co-benefit between development and climate. Yeah, this is just a sort of like some of the examples. But the main point that I was trying to say is, perhaps we cannot expect there will be a sort of like a big bang, a solution towards all of this issue. Yeah, what we need to do in the G20 forum is to select some issues that universally shared by all of the G20 members or many countries all over the world. Because we understand there are some issues, tension about geopolitical tension, the narrow self-interest, etc. But can we find a sort of like an entry point that we can sit together? So in my view, one of the potential that we can discuss at the G20 is maybe the issue of climate, exactly like what I said, because we can discuss the affordable and just transition. The second one, health issue, because every country, I believe, needs to discuss or to solve the problem of the health issue. And I have to say, regardless, despite all this complexity, geopolitical complexity, the G20 in Indonesia had made a progress by establishing the joint finance and health for the fifth. I think that's sort of like, a kind of an achievement. Of course, we cannot expect there will be a sort of like a big bang solution for everything, but we can use the G20 as an avenue for this. In the issue of climates, we can discuss about what will be the source of the financing on the climate finance, for example. That can be discussed about domestic resource management, the ODA, the private sector, the role of the private sector, philanthropists, etc. At the same time, from the demand side, we can also discuss about the issue of the project preparation. Yeah. So if we focus on this kind of issue, I believe that maybe we can share some of the common, interests that we can use this G20 as a good avenue. I recall back on 2008 when the first leaders meeting in Washington at that time, I was a Sherpa for the G20. G20 at that time was very effective because we had a common issue, the global financial crisis. So I think we can use the similar strategy to find the universally shared issues that we can discuss around the table and try to find a solution. Not probably sort of like a big bang, but truly piecemeal, but building what I call the building block. Once to create a success story, we gather the political support, then we move to more complex and difficult reform. I leave it up here. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Pak Hatip Basri. Let me move on to Professor Drysdale. Minister Retno said highlighted the importance of exiting the crisis, and I think she and Pak Hatip just now highlighted the importance of cooperation. But the problem now is that the global situation is, we can say, is at the state of trust deficit. It creates uncertainty, makes international cooperation more difficult. And one of the concerns is that the global economic governance might be more fragmented in a way. What's your take on this? And is there any role that the G20 can play to try to at least improve the situation?
Well, of course, you're absolutely right about the trust deficit, the huge trust deficit that we've been quietly reminded
Could you please
reminded about by Professor Bambang and the ministers this morning, hangs heavily over this G20 summit. Indonesia's got a really big task in managing this process. But, I've always said, and I say again, that there's no country better placed than Indonesia to manage this process at this time. We've got huge problems, 3 or 4 or 5 big global problems that we need global cooperation on. It's very difficult to get global cooperation because global cooperation is in short supply. But Indonesia is best placed to bring this. If any other country, perhaps almost any other country, had tried to host this meeting this year, the G20 would risk falling apart, frankly. What does Indonesia bring to this process, and what can Indonesia bring to this process? It brings a number of things. It brings the strength of being a leader in the developing world, and Pak Bambang referred to that as the background to this meeting this year, the summit this year. It brings its position in ASEAN as a leader in ASEAN of a group which is regionalism with global objectives, an outward-looking region that critically depends on the global system for its success and progress. And so it brings that critical interest to the process in global governance. It brings its non-alignment with the big powers and its ability to talk to both sides in this process. And of course, it brings its standing in the world of democracies. So it has these 4 big strengths that it brings to this process, and it easily talks from that position to both sides of strength. And that is a base for addressing the trust deficit that you worry about. Of course, convening the meeting alone is not going to mean success. Convening the meeting is the first step, and success in doing that's the first step. But as Pak Dede reminded us, success on substantial outcomes is going to define both G20 success and ultimately define Indonesia's success in this process. There's a lot of at stake for Indonesia's standing in the world and reputation in the successful hosting of this meeting, and we need to remember that. So that's the starting point. That's the starting point. There are many problems that confront the world, but seeing the connections between these problems is also important. If you look at the global trading system and the risks to that, we've had modest encouragement with the outcome of the MC12 in Geneva this year, and building on that's important. Indonesia's initiative in the summit in Osaka in 2019 of taking forward the so-called non-paper on WTO trade reform was a significant step forward, widely acknowledged as important to building momentum towards managing the problems in the international trade system. The opportunity to take that forward through this meeting is very important. If Indonesia can keep that pressure on for global trade reform and connect that to the 4 or 5 major problems that we have to face, then that will be a significant achievement for Indonesia. It plays in to the problems that Dede mentioned of recovery from the COVID process. It plays in to the food security and fuel security issue. It plays into dealing with the economic consequences of the war in Europe. It plays in, of course, over the long term to the whole problem of climate change and the management of the climate change problem. So these are major challenges, all of them in their own right, but the interconnectedness of them is important to understand, and the connection of them to keeping a close eye and pressure on protecting global governance of the trading system is an important interest that Indonesia has. Under Indonesia's chairmanship, of course, as Professor Bambang made clear, leads to a succession of chairs from the developing world. Indonesia, India, Brazil, South Africa, and there's an opportunity to lay the groundwork for those interests through that process. Dede mentioned the climate change issue and the primacy of that, and the way in which it offers an opportunity for bringing together a measure of consensus on a big global problem. And taking that opportunity, I think, is what we need to do through this process of the G20 in Indonesia this year. The world has been focused on that issue from a developed country perspective. But the developing world has a huge amount to gain from successfully managing that problem because it plays into so many things, long-term food security among them, and bringing people out of poverty and protecting them against poverty. So that's a potential area of common interest that can help to overcome the trust deficit. But at the end of it all, I think what the world should remember is that, those developed country interests, the G7, they're very important, and we need to connect to them in building a consensus on priority issues such as this. But this meeting and the succession of meetings will underline the importance of the rest of the world to global governance. The G20 comprises now roughly 80% of the global economy. Of that, the G7, about a bit over 30% of the global economy. 3 decades ago, it was 70% of the global economy. So the other 70% now is the rest of the world, including the developing world. And the developing world has a big stake in bringing to bear its weight now on attending to the problems of global governance, including in the trade area and including in the area of managing the big challenge of climate change. So in this way, I think there are opportunities now for leadership from a range of countries that haven't been accustomed to leadership but now have to become accustomed to leadership, the developing world, the middle powers, and it'll be a messy process, quite frankly, over the years to come, but bringing to bear their weight on global leadership through the attention and the strength of the G20 discussions. Thanks.
Thank you, Professor Drysdale. And I think following up still on discussing challenges and opportunities, I'd like to move on to Dr. Fukunari Kimura. During the early days of the pandemic, there are concerns about supply chain resilience, but it turns out that the global supply chain was strong enough and recovered quickly. Do you agree with this? What's your take on this, especially also looking at the possibility of readjustment of the supply chain as one way to overcome some of the challenges of the pandemic?
Thank you, Ms. Chair. Supply chains are everything related to international industrial linkage. So we have to see what sort of supply chains a little bit more in detail, but particularly so-called second unbundling, so task-by-task division of labor, particularly in the machinery industries. particularly in ASEAN and East Asia. Those kind of supply chains were very robust and resilient at the end. So if you see the statistics very carefully, then that is very obvious. So many people are worrying about the fragility of supply chains, but the really sophisticated portion of supply chains were really robust and resilient. So we have to see that. And so when people say the fragility of supply chains, in many cases they are worrying about geopolitical tensions. Actually, the link with the geopolitical tensions cannot be neglected right now. So actually the debate over geopolitical issues became very harsh in G7 countries. I'm just watching very closely for Tokyo and Washington, D.C., but the scope of debates have been expanded from just trade issues to technology and power competition between superpowers, and also assertion of values such as democracy and human rights. So policy discussion is now really filled with geopolitical confrontation, and some degree of decoupling of global supply chains seems to be inevitable. But despite the tension in the political debates, surprisingly, the economy is moving. The national security arguments and the economic reality are sharply separated in G7, as Pascal Lamy pointed out in Foreign Affairs in June. So if you look at the really elementary trade statistics, the U.S. exports to China increased in 2021, not only in agricultural products, but also semiconductors, actually. And also the Japanese exports to China recorded the highest in 2021, with large exports of machinery and high-tech products. So the trade controls are expanded in G7, but at the same time, it doesn't mean that the trade is going to be zero. So actually, trade permissions are really issued very quickly too. So far, some moves of supply chain decoupling are advanced, particularly in products with sensitive technologies, batteries, and also rare earth-related products. However, international trade in aggregated figures does not seem to be influenced much by trade controls. So the many would expect now, I think, that decoupling of global supply chains could go further, but the scope would be limited at the end. So geopolitical tensions increase uncertainties. So particularly this year, we have a lot of worries over there. Uncertainties are likely to weaken active economic activities, particularly investment. So in addition, right now we have unstable international economy possibly, with the hike of food and energy prices, inflation, the rise of interest rates, and also the possible instability of macroeconomic fundamentals, particularly in the developing world. So those would slowing down economic growth in the world. So the likely victim is the developing world. So then what to do? One thing for the G7 countries, for their own sake, even if trade and investment controls will be further strengthened, these controls must be well defined and specified to reduce additional uncertainties, and also the implementation of controls should be efficient. So the shrinkage effect on private sector must be avoided as far as possible. And also, the rest of the economy out of the trade controls must be placed under the rule-based trading regime in order to keep investment and economic dynamism. One way to do is certainly a big voice coming from the developing world. We still need economic growth. In order to do that, we need trade and investment. I think that big voice is very, very important. And also, we can utilize regional trade agreements such as AEC or RCEP to reduce policy risks using the institutional setting of those agreements with ministerial meetings, joint committees, and the secretariat. And also, the WTO is very, very important in order to keep the rule-based trading regime. Particularly right now, the appellate body is not working. I think we have to have a reliable dispute settlement mechanism. So those things are definitely the developing world should claim, even if some part of world trade is under trade and investment controls. In addition, even the developing world may want to make some adjustment for possible backlashes coming from geopolitical tensions. For example, exports of products for which specific US technology and software are used, those products are under the US export control. This is extraterritoriality, so how to deal with that. And also, the import controls by G7 countries on human rights-related products and also due diligence imposed on corporate activities are strengthened. How to do that? And also the risk of cyber attacks is intensified by geopolitics. So I think those things that even the developing world should think of that. So I think the developing world needs economic growth, and we think much of freer trade, freer investment, and thus we must defend the rule-based trading regime. I think this is a very important thing that the developing world should claim this time. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Still on the issue of cooperation, now I'd like to move to Dr. Dennis Hu. The role of regional groupings such as APEC, G20 of course, is critical, at least for offering a dialogue forum. But we also know that there are criticisms towards these groupings. What do you think we can do, basically to improve the effectiveness of APEC, of other multilateral forums? And how do you see aligning the agenda of these different platforms?
Thank you, Fifi. I was just going to say, besides Indonesia, who's hosting G20 summit in October, Thailand, who is hosting APEC, will also have their leaders meeting in November, and again, all the major powers will be there, and so it's, regional international cooperation would just be as challenging. I just came back from Chiang Mai. We had our third senior officials meetings, and I can tell you, it's difficult to divide geopolitical tensions and issues from economics and trade. APEC is an economic trade forum, but you can't do that in isolation. That's the reality, all right? I think what is crucial is in platforms like APEC and G20 is that every member, every economy is able to state their position, right, where they stand, right? At the same time, there are many working groups, technical working groups, that are working all the time. APEC is not just about the leaders meeting in November. Throughout the year, we have different types of technical working groups, the SME working group, HRD working group. We have also a steering committee on the digital economy. And all these different experts are meeting and discussing different issues. And that goes on, right? I recently gave an economic outlook briefing to trade officials in Chiang Mai. And I think we all know the outlook is pessimistic. We're living in economically a much more hostile environment. The APEC is expected to grow by 2.5% this year, from 5.9% last year. We saw that recovery last year, but unfortunately we know that the Asia-Pacific region, as well as the rest of the world, is slowing down, right? And we know that various downside risks continue to be growing, and with increased uncertainties. We know that the conflict in Ukraine, if it continues to be protracted, has implications on energy, food prices, and we know that inflation is a major issue, which is affecting growth, right? And And inflation, as we know, is becoming much more broad-based, going beyond just, food and energy. And that's why you see this tightening of monetary policy by many central banks across the region. Supply chain disruptions, again, inflation has already started to rise even last year. And I think Fuku is an expert on many of these things, that supply chain disruptions has affected the delivery of goods. There's this imbalance between supply and demand, and that has led to increase in prices, which unfortunately this year has been exacerbated by the conflict in Ukraine. So these are some of the issues that continues to be in the mind of many policymakers as they move forward. So the key issue here is that we state our positions, and then I think it's important for us to move forward to rebuild our economies, to make sure that our economies are resilient. And this is where good policies matter. It's one thing to talk about many of these priorities, and APEC, G20, we share many of these similar priorities and emerging challenges. And the challenge, of course, is to convert those good policies into concrete actions. In the short term, for example, we need to make sure that everybody is healthy, to ensure that everyone is vaccinated. And we all talk about living with the virus because we have different vaccines out there. But I think the WHO chief, Dr. Tedros, just mentioned 1 million people have died from COVID-19 this year. So we're not quite living with the virus just yet, right? It's important to get as many people access to vaccines, to get them vaccinated so that we're healthy and we can rebuild our economies. I think that's one area that's quite crucial to look at. Again, we talked about concerns about rising trade protectionism, export restrictions for particularly essential goods like medicine, vaccines, PPE. Those are things that we need to ensure that they are reduced or removed, particularly during times of crisis. And this is something that APEC we've been talking about for some time now. The other important area is cross-border mobility. We have a special task force in APEC on cross-border mobility to ensure that we can revive and restart our economies, to ensure that professionals, businessmen, tourists, we can move across borders more easily. Mutual recognitions of health and vaccine certificates will be one of the things that we should be talking about. In APEC, I know some of you may have the APEC Business Travel Card. Now, the APEC Business Travel Card is currently being digitized, so there's a lot of discussions now whether we could embed our vaccine certificates, our health certificates in these APEC Business Travel Cards to make it easier for not just businessmen but other types of professionals, experts to move across border to do business and to facilitate greater business opportunities across the region. So I think these are some of the areas. Again, as I mentioned, APEC, G20, we have very similar visions of and goals, right? And one of the crucial one, of course, is much more inclusive growth, right? Which is also part of the new APEC vision, the Putrajaya vision, which was launched in 2020. Ensuring that the most vulnerable groups are protected and to see what needs to be done by policymakers to support them. I think that's quite crucial. We know that during the period at the height of the pandemic, most women had to exit the labor market much earlier than men, particularly in developed economies, given the fact that many of them have a greater proportion of household chores, homeschooling, and the concern, of course, is to bring them back into the labor force will be quite crucial. We also saw an acceleration of different types of digital technology. I think many of you look at the surveys, they found that what took maybe 6 or 7 years of adopting different kinds of digital technologies was accelerated during the COVID, at the height of the pandemic. And that's been a lifesaver for many small businesses who were able to shift their businesses online. But also the other concern as we move forward in the medium term is that with greater acceleration of digital adoption, many workers will be displaced. And I think we've seen that concern, and there's been a lot of discussions about how do we move workers who have been displaced from certain sectors to new sectors. So again, there's a lot of work that we need to be done on reskilling, retraining. What can governments do in terms of providing these sort of assistance to particularly micro, small, medium enterprises? I think I'm running out of time, so I'll stop here for the time being. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hugh. Last, I'd like to move on to Dr. Alicia Garcia Herrero. Back to the agendas of the G20. How do you see the agendas of the G20? Will it really provide greater certainty to the market? Because we keep talking about, uncertainty and how G20 could actually play a role in improving the situation. Do you see the current agenda of G20 might provide greater certainty to the market and attract private sector involvement in the recovery process?
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
So first of all, thank you for the invitation. This is a great opportunity. I'm very glad to be here and to see Indonesia running this wonderful G20, no matter the difficulties. It's really very kind of you to try very hard to keep the G20 alive. On that note, I'm going to move on to why somehow something has happened for our agenda, G20 agenda, to look somehow, I would say, long-term compared to what we have in front of us. I mean, I was trying to go through the list of questions you asked me. I happen to talk to quite a few investors because I have a role as chief economist at a bank, and I always talk about resilience, inclusivity, and they look at me and, but what about now? So I want to start with that. What about now? And that now is about faux amis, as we say in French, basically misguided thoughts that I think we have sometimes when we sit in policy fora, because we want to solve the big issues, rightly so. But sometimes investors look at maybe the immediate issues, and here are a few. The first is that we start with the title recovery, and that's right. That's where we all wanted to be after a global pandemic. But we're not in a recovery, we're in a global deceleration. And as such, it so happens that the other thing that we heard from the minister, and rightly so, is that when two elephants fight, the grass, but the two elephants are doing worse than the rest. If you look at prospects, GDP growth prospects for China and the US, the divergence is growing, and we have the big question mark of the war in Europe. So we might end up being with the elephants for reasons beyond our control. But the reality is that if you look at ASEAN, excluding China, growth is actually better. So there's this irony, this kind of strange situation, where the rest of the world looks more resilient, especially ASEAN. And I think I want to highlight that too, because investors are watching and are saying, wait a minute, I thought they would be doing worse given what's happening. The other faux amis, misguided reality is that it seems, especially from wonderful place like Bali, that the war is in Europe. It's right there in Europe. I mean, it's not here, isn't it? But I'm now based in Taipei, and I can tell you that's not the way I feel. Okay? And I want to highlight the fact that this is not just post-COVID recovery that we should be talking about. This is about keeping peace, which is, for investors, much more immediate than anything else. So this is why I would like to go back to, the immediate things that we need to do. On that note, the second third actually misguided thought that I wanted to convey to you is this idea that we have the developed world and we have the emerging world in the G20, and they seemingly should be like two different groups, and one should be helping the other. And yeah, all of that is understandable, but things are changing. We have major creditors, actually flow-wise the largest creditor in the world, which is China. And which group is China in? Because I'm not sure. I mean, if I want to talk about debt restructuring, which I happen to write about for the T20 in Italy, I'm not sure who I should be referring to when writing about that, and what kind of solutions, given the different structure of that creditor. And by the way, it's not only China. or the mainland. We have other creditors. We have South Korea, we have Taiwan, we have other big creditors for their size. So the other one is that in this divide of the developed versus emerging world, I realize that food inflation is a big problem for the emerging economies, but bear in mind that inflation is much higher in the developed world, which we kind of sometimes seem to forget. And inclusivity issues are humongous at the current juncture, also in the developed world. And therefore, to me, it seems like we have increasingly more similar problems than we thought we had. I don't know whether that's a good thing, because somebody has to keep the boat going, but we should be aware of that. On energy transition, I can't agree more with Dr. Chatri Basri, because we need to find ways for people to want to do this. We just can't impose to suffering people, because that's where we are heading, because of inflation, because of threat of war, because of many, many problems we're heading beyond the pandemic and its scarring. We need to find ways for them to jump on it and to see the benefits. And for that, again, we may have the impression in the West that we have the means. Well, I have to tell you, we don't have the means. It's a very costly exercise for the West too. Humongously costly, and coupled with the war, even more costly. And you may think we have the technology to do this, but we happen not to. It's not about sharing. We don't have it. We are not the largest exporters of solar panels. We're not. China exports 80%. That's the global share. And again, it is great to have everybody on board, but we have to have everybody on board. That's where we are with the energy transition. So we need to kind of come up with whoever can do something best, no matter their label. We need to stop labeling countries, because if we do, we'll have groups that are very heterogeneous, that can't get along, and that can't find solutions. I move on to what we need to do as quick as possible. And I think beyond resilience, and there's been a lot discussed already on resilience, we wrote actually a piece for this T20 on resilience. It was all about digital and how we could use the harmonization of corporate tax globally to find resources to do that. And when we started this, it was before the war, and I thought, well, this is a great idea. You know, as I sit now, I'm thinking, wait a minute, this is great, but what about ABC that we need to do immediately? So let me go through ABC, and I finish here. Food security. I mean, this is urgent. We can talk about, again, green, digital, but if we can't solve food security, we just can't have our people onboarded on any project, G20, APEC, anything, the European Union, it doesn't really matter. So that's one. The second is more about financial issues. We are at the brink, and this is because of tightening the US, increasingly Europe, a very strong dollar. We are at the brink of a global liquidity crunch. Again, we were there in March 2020. And in March 2020, the Fed was very quick to react, much more than in 2008, as we all know. We need the Fed back. An extended number of swap lines, because the IMF, no matter how much they tried since COVID, is not yet ready for this. So we need to go back to liquidity issues as soon as possible. And finally, restructuring. Debt restructuring, that was my other contribution to Italy's T20. There we proposed a new fund, basically, to help restructure that more quickly. I think Sri Lanka's case puts it very bluntly. We don't have means for countries to restructure debt quickly. We need to find solutions. We have outdated solutions where country A or country B can stop restructuring at the IMF level, and that can't happen. So whoever can be on board, it should jump. And if the IMF is not the institution, we need to come up with something else. So basically, in a nutshell, I'd like to say that as much as I believe we should think medium term, we still have so many urgent issues that we need to deal with at this G20. So I hope the agenda will accommodate some of those. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much to all the 5 speakers. We have just a little bit more than 20 minutes left in the session today. And I'd like to go for a second round of again, discussion with all of you. And in this second round, I'd like perhaps you could comment on the other panelists' remarks and maybe also raise new questions for us to discuss. And I'd like to go back to you again, Pa Dede. I think one of the things that have been mentioned, I think not only by the other panelists here, but also during the opening remarks is, highlighting this, this is the start of the series of G20 presidents of developing countries, even though just now Dr. Garcia Herrero reminded us not to really label countries, but there seems to be a really high expectation on this, that this is, that finally developing countries would benefit from G20. What's your take on this? And maybe later on I'll also ask the other panelists to comment on this.
Well, thank you very much. I think this is a very important question because it seems to me that the pandemic changed the way we see the world. Yeah. So let me give an example. The way economists look at the issue of health, for example, we always take health as a sort of like quote unquote a burden from the expenditure side. But one thing we learned from the pandemic, health is a very important, it is investment because once it's collapsed, then economic activity collapse. Second thing we also learned from the pandemic is it is very important to prepare the impact of what we call the scarring effect. Yeah, look at the issue of this possibility of the widening of the gender gap because most of women work in the informal sector hit by the pandemic, or the risk of the K-shaped recovery, or the risk of the setback the quality of the human capital because not all of the people have an access to do the distance learning, the online system at that time. All of these issues that I mentioned, that I raised, bring back the development issues into the G20 agenda. Honestly speaking, if you look at the design of the Bretton Woods, Peter maybe can comment on it. Bretton Woods was designed mostly on the several issues related to the international monetary cooperation, to the trade, to the expansion of the economic growth. But the main issue that we need to look at in the future is perhaps has to do with the inclusive growth, with the climate issue, with the health issue, with the scarring effect of the pandemic, the rising inequality. And this is not only unique in developing economies, but mainly main issues in the developing countries. So that is why I think it is very timely, since now for this year the host is Indonesia, and next will be India, and after that will be Brazil, to sort of like bring back the issue of the development into the G20 agenda. Because in the last, since 2008, most of the issues been dominated by the issue of the international finance, the sort of like the main mandate of the Bretton Woods. But in the future, I think it is very important to bring back this agenda. I recall, was back in 2014, if I'm not mistaken, Peter. It was the first time that G20 brought the idea of the investment on infrastructure. Yeah, before that, we didn't discuss about the issue of infrastructure. So I think it is about time to bring back the issue of the development on the G20 agenda, on the climate issue, etc. And since the host now is Indonesia, and after this, India and Brazil, this is very timely. And this is something I don't want to sort of like make a dichotomy between developing economies and advanced economies. But this is the issue that the global need to address. The food security is everyone's issue. The climate change is everyone's issue. But unfortunately, the design of the Bretton Woods, unfortunately, exactly what Secretary Yellen said, Bretton Woods was not designed to prepare for the multifaceted crisis, including health, including the climate, and also the economic crisis. So I do hope that after Indonesia, India, and Brazil, we can bring back the issue of the development into the agenda of the G20.
Thank you, Pa. Professor Drysdale, would you like to also make a comment on this and maybe also highlight, going forward, what are the bottlenecks for greater cooperation?
Well, I think it's been said many times over here this morning, the big blockage, of course, is the geopolitical tensions and working around those to get a resolution of some of the issues that the world has to get resolution to. That is right. Bringing the developing country agenda back into the forefront of the G20 is the way to go. It's especially with the alignment of leaderships in the process that we have now. And this is the starting point, potentially, of a significant shift in leadership generally towards a focus on developing country issues. And climate change is front and center of that, although it's been seen to date as an issue primarily driven by the G7 group. It shouldn't be. And there's a huge opportunity through this meeting to kick that ball off. The geopolitical stars actually favor initiative on this front at the moment. As the point was made about the importance of the engagement of China in that process by Alicia, and the work between China and the United States in the Sustainable Finance Working Group is a base for that to begin, and the work that can be taken forward through that on international financial market reform to incentivize investment in green finance, private investment in green finance is an important interest here. And Indonesia can start that process, India and so on. It's a long-term agenda. We've tended to see G20 agendas as one-off exercises. They can't be one-off exercises to be effective, and so working through a process over time is the way to go. Keeping open markets open is obviously another important part of the process. The decoupling exercise that's set in train by the trade war between China and the United States, the effect of that on ASEAN is to wipe 12% of GDP off ASEAN. That's a conservative estimate, frankly. We're revisiting those numbers. That's what the research says. We've got to, as think tanks, constantly remind leaders of the consequences of what these developments are in their policy strategies to ensure that there isn't a disaster of that kind in our region and in the world. So keeping markets open and a focus on the climate change agenda from a development perspective is an important interest, I think, in the G20 leaderships going forward. And G20 still provides a platform which is inclusive of all the interests that are required to attend to these problems. And Indonesia's hosting of the meeting successfully here, of course, provides impetus to that, the use of that platform for these purposes.
Thank you, Professor Drysdale. Dr. Kimura, maybe you'd like to join on this topic as well, and also highlighting, how do we respond to some of the criticisms towards G20, some of the issues that G20 is seen as failing, and so how do we respond to these issues?
Okay, coming. Yeah, I think if you think of the members of G20, that's very difficult now. So we have US, China, Russia, and everybody. So I think make a sort of really concrete, very good statement out of G20 could be very, very difficult, of course. It's very unfortunate that the argument, geopolitical argument in G7 is really intensified, and really, I don't know how to mitigate, make a sort of argument mild and reasonable. That's very, very difficult to do. So we cannot really stop some sort of trade control, investment control in the name of national security. So even under the policy discipline in WTO, so the GATT Article 21 is allowing various kinds of trade restrictions based on national security reasons, and also how to think of national security reasons reasonably or not. So this is pretty much self-judgment. So each country can decide. So in the past, all countries were pretty conservative in utilizing GATT Article 21, but not anymore in a sense. So we cannot really stop that. But I think for G7 countries, it's very important to communicate with the developing world. This is a sort of a good balancer. If we think of their economy, the economy portion is moving, then political debate is so intensified. So we have some really sharp separation. We have to notice that. And also, there is a risk, on the other hand, that they really forget the developing world right now. So I think it's really G20 should be utilized in that kind of, in order to make a sort of big voice coming from the developing world, even if we cannot really get a really concrete, really solutions of this kind of tensions. The role of T20 is very important too. In T20, we can say almost anything. G20 very difficult, but I think it's very important. And also the timing of the communique is very good. In the past, in T20, G20, the preparation of policy briefs were too early. So we did that in Tokyo. The first draft was in March, and in May we had a sort of handover already. But the G20 is coming very, very late, actually. So there really is a sort of separation of T20 and G20. But this time, the timing is good. So in T20, we have to put very sort of concrete ideas, even if a little bit radical, and that's very important. And so even if we cannot really go through G20, but the voice coming from the developing world, particularly represented by Indonesia, is extremely important. So we have to utilize this opportunity like that.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kimura. Dr. Hugh, please join us also to give your comment on this matter, but maybe also adding what, still our discussion about regional groupings like APEC, what else can they do?
Thank you. Well, APEC and G20 are in many ways very similar kinds of regional groupings. It's a mix of developed and developing members. I think, as was mentioned, Indonesia is hosting G20 this year. Thailand is hosting APEC this year. There's been a strong development agenda in the priorities of different hosts as well. And I think what's central in APEC is capacity building. Right? So we also see the north-south divide between two, but it's a great platform for developed economies developing to work together, to see where there's best practices that can be adopted, as well as different types of capacity building workshops that can be run. I think one of the concerns that I have in different types of regional groupings is that they're hosting the year, they come up with great statements, right, or deliverables, and then next year it's a reset, all right. And I think that's one of the big concerns. We also have that concern, and I think it's important to have a continuity of different types of initiatives over the years to come. Otherwise, frankly speaking, many of these institutions really will become irrelevant. We've got very serious emerging challenges looking at climate change. We talked about climate change as one. We also have digital transformation, which is good and bad. There's pros and cons to digital transformation. And then we know that income inequality and inequality has widened because of the pandemic, right? I think the World Bank has mentioned more than 100 million people have fallen, more people have fallen into poverty, setting back a lot of the poverty alleviation agenda programs of the World Bank, the ADB, and where I used to be moving forward. So I think those are some of the things. I don't know whether G20 has it, but in APEC we have this something called the Troika. Past hosts, current hosts, and incoming hosts will come together to discuss continuing different types of programs moving forward. The other thing I've also observed over the years is that we're all running very, very similar types of initiatives and also different types of workshops. There's a lot of duplication, whether we're doing things on digital literacy, connectivity. And I think it's a good idea to see how G20, APEC, even ASEAN, we can work together. I mean, ASEAN is a permanent observer in APEC, so they have an opportunity to participate. But I think there's a lot of synergies and there's opportunities for us to work together in conducting different types of capacity building workshops and other kinds of events that would help. Otherwise, it's really a waste of resources, frankly speaking. So I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you. Last, of course, but not least, Dr. Garcia Herrero, we would love to hear your thoughts on this matter as well, but also on still back to the challenges of the G20, especially in terms of coordination across macroeconomic policies. You know, how do we ensure inclusivity? I mean, that word has been repeated so many times during the course of this discussion, but how do we ensure inclusivity and also in terms of, you know, recovery in the short run and in the long run, quality development, you know, within the framework of G20?
Well, I think the word I would use is the show must go on, and I will explain that. I think it seems to me that given the uncertainties and the difficulties at the geopolitical level, we might not find solutions for everybody, will we? And I think perhaps the G20 must start thinking, okay, who is coming? Who is coming along to this initiative? Who is coming along to that other initiative? So basically, try to bring those who can move faster, because there is a lot of peer pressure by doing that. And you know, we have in Europe quite a few examples of working this way, because if not, you will be dragging your feet. And especially as, frankly speaking, there are forces working for two ecosystems, yeah? So as you have those centrifugal forces, if you want to move along, you need to say, okay, here's a group who is signing up. And I would start with the WTO. I think by now, it's 2022, we should acknowledge the fact that it will be very hard to reform the WTO. So what else can we do, rather than just wait and wait and wait? So that would be my approach to anything, from development to inclusivity to short-term issues, international finance. You know, we have all of this sovereign debt on our shoulders from the developing world. I mean, there's lots of long-term things to do, but frankly speaking, as we move to risk in Pakistan, in other countries, that's going to be, you know, the agenda for the next few months for sure. And there, I think what we need to know is who is ready. So I would move into those circles of policy actions at the G20 level. I can't see a way to continue at the speed we had before the war, because we are in that situation. And that would be my recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you so much to all the 5 speakers. I think this has been a very insightful session. We discussed so many things, both the challenges, the opportunities from G20, and I think our discussion this morning can really be, hopefully, can be a start to kick off further discussions in all the sessions later on throughout today and tomorrow. I'm afraid we have come to the end of the session this morning. I will not try to summarize anything that has been discussed, not only because it's difficult, but because we covered, I think, so many grounds. But I think, all in all, we agree that G20, as a representation of the world's major economies, is expected, again, to be a bridge for various interests. And from our discussion, we also find that there is actually quite high expectation regarding of what G20 can achieve. But of course, in reality, we discussed so many challenges that we are facing, criticisms both towards G20 and also the other groupings. And I think this is part of what we are trying to do here at the T20, to see and discuss, to what extent we can actually work together to overcome some of the challenges that have been discussed throughout the session. So we have come to the end of this session, and to officially end the session, please join me to thank all of the 5 speakers that have given us such insightful remarks and discussion this morning. So thank you so much again.
Thank you so much to the chair of the first plenary sessions and also all of the panelists on the first session. Now we would like to invite you all to have a photo session for a while, to officially mark the closing of the first plenary session and also to commemorate our joint togetherness during the first discussion session, please.
Yes, please. There was really an insightful and amazing insight that been discussed. Please take your position to take pictures together.
Kindly make a line in front of the table. Yes, please. And please look at the main photographer located in front of all of you. Well, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, please join us once again to give a round of applause to all of the panelists and also the chair of the first plenary session. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, you may be seated. Thank you so much.
Well, before we start the second plenary session that we have today during the T20 Indonesia Summit 2022, ladies and gentlemen, we would like to kindly remind you that we were going to have a short break for the coffee and tea, which are already served at the foyer area. However, before you proceed to the coffee and also tea, we would like to kindly remind you for our parallel session, which will start it after lunch session later on.
Yes, we have an announcement regarding parallel session registration. Please do notify that it is important for joining the parallel session. For all speakers, you are free to join the parallel session as you wish, given there are available seats in the room. And for all participants, you are required to show your barcode before you enter the parallel session. For all participants that have already registered through Eventbrite and already get the barcode, please join the session that you prefer maximum 10 minutes after the session has started. If you don't join the preferred session after 10 minutes, we will release your spot.
Yes, and for all participants who haven't registered yet, so please kindly register yourself at the registration counter because you will get your ID card, and it is an obligation to follow the parallel session. And also please keep wearing your mask during the parallel session. And later on, if you haven't got your barcode and also ID card, once again, you may enter the session by register yourself at the registration counter 10 minutes after the session has started, given then if there's still available spots. And now for the coffee and tea break session, which are available at the foyer area, we also have interesting activities, so please involve on those activities. We have the instant photo print there, and then also we have the area booth. If you'd like to get further details, or maybe if you'd like to have a networking session with the area representatives, they are also very ready to welcome you at their booth located in the foyer area. And we also have the cultural activities in the booth area for the coffee and tea break session. We have the Balinese painters named Anton, which also will do the painting lively in the foyer area. So for those of you who would like maybe to contribute to the local community, and we would like to maybe to make a real and also concrete implementations of inclusiveness in the economy by including the local economy and also the small medium enterprises. We have the painters there, and you can contribute by maybe purchasing their products there, the paintings, of course.
Yes.
So now,
for now, ladies and gentlemen, enjoy your coffee break. We will meet shortly for the next agenda. Once again, enjoy the coffee break.
yes. It will be around 50 minutes, and later on we're going to call you back here by 10:45 a.m. local time. Once again, 10:45 a.m. local time. Thank you and enjoy your coffee and tea.
At the current affairs where we witnessed lingering COVID-19 pandemic,